The hum of the dishwasher was the only sound in the kitchen as Benjamin rinsed his travel mug. He tightened the lid and glanced at the clock. Morning routines in the Williams household were a well-oiled machine after 23 years of practice. Benjamin was the early riser, often out the door before anyone else stirred. Today, however, Jessica was up early, her voice carrying from the living room. "Don't forget about tonight," she called, her tone cheerful. "Wouldn't miss it," Benjamin replied, grinning as he stepped into the room. Jessica sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a mug of coffee balanced on her knee. "What's the occasion?" he asked, slipping on his shoes. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "It's a surprise, Benjamin. You don't ask about surprises." "Fair enough." He adjusted his tie and leaned against the doorframe. "Any hints?" Jessica stood and walked over to him, lightly tugging his tie to straighten it. Her bracelet, a gift he'd given her last Christmas, caught the light. "Just be ready. Dress sharp. It's going to be special." Benjamin chuckled. "Special how?" "You'll see," she said with a playful smirk, brushing past him. He lingered for a moment, watching her as she disappeared into the bedroom. The past few years hadn't been perfect, but who had a perfect marriage? They'd been through tough times, bills, arguments, the exhaustion of raising kids, but Benjamin always felt they had a solid foundation. Jessica's smile, her laugh, the way she'd surprise him with little things, those moments made the effort worth it. As he grabbed his briefcase and keys, he hesitated. "You sure everything's okay?" he asked, unsure where the question came from. Jessica poked her head out of the bedroom, her expression soft but slightly bemused. "Of course, Benjamin. Now go, or you'll be late." That evening, Benjamin stood in front of his closet, flipping through suits. Jessica's request to dress sharp felt oddly specific. Usually, their date nights were casual affairs, a nice dinner at a local spot or takeout on the couch. As he settled on a charcoal gray suit, his phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from his best friend, Derek. "Benjamin, hey, dinner plans with Jess tonight. Want to grab a beer this weekend?" "Derek, busy weekend, man. Let's catch up soon." Benjamin frowned. Derek's responses had been brief and distant lately. They used to hang out regularly, watching games, fishing trips, or just shooting the breeze over beers. Lately, though, Derek always seemed too busy. Benjamin texted back. "Benjamin, everything good? You've been MIA. "Derek, yeah, just slammed. Talk soon." Setting the phone down, Benjamin stared at it for a moment before shrugging. Maybe Derek was just overwhelmed with work. Benjamin knew what that was like. Jessica peeked into the room, already dressed in a sleek black dress. "Ready?" she asked. Benjamin turned and gave her an appreciative nod. "You look stunning." She smiled but didn't respond, instead grabbing her purse from the dresser. "Where are we going, anyway?" he asked as he followed her to the car. "Patience," she said with a teasing glance over her shoulder. The rich aroma of truffle pasta and seared steak filled the air as Benjamin stepped into the restaurant. The restaurant was more extravagant than Benjamin expected. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the muted sound of a piano filled the space. "Fancy," Benjamin remarked, trying to mask his unease. A host in a crisp black suit greeted him, but Benjamin's eyes scanned the room before he could respond. There she was, Jessica, sitting at a corner table. She laughed, her hand brushing against the arm of the man seated across from her. Benjamin's stomach sank as he recognized Derek, his best friend. "Sir, may I help you?" the host asked. Benjamin raised a hand absent-mindedly. "I see them," he muttered, weaving through the maze of tables. His heart raced, each step toward them a mix of dread and confusion. Jessica looked up as he approached, her smile sharpening into something colder. "Benjamin, you're late," she said lightly, the words more a jab than a greeting. Benjamin pulled out a chair and sat, his gaze darting between her and Derek. "What's going on?" Jessica exchanged a glance with Derek before leaning back, crossing her arms. "What's going on?" she echoed, her tone mocking. "Let's cut to the chase, Benjamin." She reached in her purse and pulled out a stack of papers, setting them on the table. "Divorce papers," she said, her voice unervingly calm. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Jessica, what the hell is this? I've moved everything we saved into my personal account, she continued, ignoring his question. The house, the cars, the investments, I'm taking my share. You can keep the kids. They'll be fine with you. Benjamin blinked, his mind reeling. Wait, you've what? Jessica's expression didn't waver. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. I don't need you anymore, Benjamin. I haven't for a long time. Derek and I are leaving tonight, starting with a romantic honeymoon. You're joking, Benjamin said, his voice low but trembling. I'm not, Jessica replied, smirking. I'm done with this, she gestured vaguely at him. This boring, mediocre life. Benjamin turned to Derek, his hands clenching the edge of the table. And you? You're just sitting here, going along with this? Derek shrugged, sipping his wine. It's not personal, buddy. Things happen. Not personal? Benjamin's voice rose, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. You're my best friend. You've been in my house, around my kids, and this is not personal. Jessica's smirk deepened, her tone mocking. Don't embarrass yourself, Benjamin. You always were so dramatic. Benjamin ignored her, focusing on Derek. How long? He demanded. Derek tilted his head, swirling the wine in his glass. Does it matter? We're here now. Benjamin's pulse pounded in his ears. He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. How long, Derek? Jessica sighed, exasperated. Years, Benjamin. Years. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. He gripped the table, his knuckles white. Years? You're so oblivious, Jessica said, laughing softly. You didn't even notice. You were too busy playing the perfect husband. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. I worked late to provide for this family. I sacrificed for us. And this is how you repay me? Jessica rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Spare me the martyr act. You were just a paycheck, Benjamin. You still are. But now I don't need you. Derek chuckled, raising his glass. Cheers to new beginnings, huh? Benjamin stared at them, his chest heaving. The words, the betrayal, they crushed him. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir. Jessica stood, smoothing her dress. We're done here, she said. Sign the papers, Benjamin. Make it easy on yourself. Benjamin remained seated, his gaze locked on the table. Jessica leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're a loser, Benjamin. You always have been. She straightened and looped her arm through Derek's. Let's go, babe. They walked away, laughing softly, leaving Benjamin alone at the table. The waiter approached hesitantly, holding a wine list. Sir, would you like? Benjamin raised a hand, cutting him off. No, he said quietly, his voice steady. The waiter nodded and backed away. Benjamin picked up the divorce papers, his hands trembling. The betrayal, the humiliation, it all weighed down on him like a crushing tide. But as he stared at Jessica's signature at the bottom of the stack, something inside him shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he folded the papers in half and slid them into his pocket. Then, with a deep breath, he stood and walked out of the restaurant. The evening air was cool against his face. He stood on the sidewalk, his mind racing. The woman he'd loved for over 2 decades, the friend he'd trusted like a brother, they had betrayed him in the most brutal way possible. He glanced back at the restaurant, the faint glow of chandeliers visible through the window. For a moment, he considered storming back in, confronting them again, making a scene. But he stopped himself. No, he muttered under his breath. Jessica and Derek had made their choices. Now it was time for him to make his. Benjamin straightened his tie and began walking, his jaw set. If they thought he would crumble, they were wrong. If they thought this was the end, they had no idea what was coming. Benjamin spent the first few days after the restaurant disaster in a haze. The betrayal was a persistent weight pressing down on him. But even through the pain, one thing became clear. He couldn't let Jessica and Derek win. They had underestimated him, treating him like a doormat they could walk all over. They thought he'd crumble. They were wrong. On the third night, long after the kids had gone to bed, Benjamin sat at the kitchen table. His laptop was open, and a stack of old financial documents was spread out before him. A mug of untouched coffee sat nearby, growing cold. He scrolled through the online banking statements, his jaw tightening as he confirmed what Jessica had said. She had indeed drained their joint account, every penny. Unbelievable, Benjamin muttered, his voice low. His mind raced. Jessica had played her cards, but she didn't know the full deck. Benjamin had always kept a separate emergency fund, one she wasn't aware of. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. Benjamin opened a spreadsheet and began typing furiously, making notes and calculations. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind was sharp, fueled by a mix of anger and resolve. By midnight, he had a plan sketched out. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He closed his laptop and leaned back, rubbing his temples. He knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Benjamin made his first call to a lawyer, someone he'd found after hours of research. When the line connected, a calm, confident voice greeted him. "Jonathan Brooks, Family Law. How can I help you?" "Mr. Brooks, my name is Benjamin Williams," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to discuss a divorce situation. It's complicated. Complicated is my specialty," Brooks said, a hint of humor in his tone. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" Benjamin hesitated for a moment, then launched into the story, the betrayal, the money, the kids. Brooks listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. When Benjamin finished, there was a pause. "Well, Benjamin, I'll be honest," Brooks said. "This is ugly, but it's not the end of the world. First, we need to secure what's left of your assets. Do you have anything she doesn't know about?" Benjamin smirked slightly. "I do. A separate account she's never touched." "Good," Brooks replied. "We'll protect that. Next, we'll challenge the funds she took from the joint account. Depending on how those accounts were set up, you might have a case to reclaim some of it." "That's good to hear," Benjamin said. "One more thing," Brooks added. "Gather evidence. Texts, emails, financial transactions, anything that paints a clear picture of what she and this other party have done. The more you have, the stronger your case." Benjamin nodded, even though Brooks couldn't see him. "Got it? I'll start tonight." That evening, Benjamin sat back at his kitchen table, this time with a new determination. He opened an email thread he'd shared with Jessica over the years and began combing through it. There were hints, cryptic messages, late-night conversations she'd brushed off. Looking at them now, the signs were painfully obvious. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his son, Liam, who was away at college. "Liam, hey Dad, everything okay? Mom hasn't answered my calls." Benjamin stared at the screen, his chest tightening. He had avoided telling the kids the truth, not wanting to drag them into the mess. "Benjamin, everything's fine, son. Just busy with some stuff. How's school?" Liam responded quickly. "Liam, good. Let me know if you need help with anything." Benjamin set the phone down, guilt creeping in. He hated lying to his son, but now wasn't the time to reveal everything. The next step in his plan was hiring a private investigator. Benjamin had never considered something so drastic before, but he needed answers and leverage. He found someone through an online search, a man named Alex Kane, who came highly recommended. They met at a small cafe the following afternoon. Kane was a no-nonsense type, dressed casually but exuding professionalism. "So, you want me to dig into your wife and her companion," Kane said, flipping open a notebook. "Yes," Benjamin replied. "I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, where they've been, any skeletons in their closets." Kane nodded. "Understood. This kind of work isn't cheap, but it sounds like you're ready to commit." Benjamin slid an envelope across the table. "Here's a retainer. I'll pay the rest when you deliver." Kane pocketed the envelope and stood. "I'll get started right away. You'll hear from me in a week." Benjamin watched him leave, feeling a mix of apprehension and satisfaction. He was taking control, piece by piece. That night, Benjamin finally allowed himself a moment to reflect. He sat in his bedroom, staring at a photo of his family taken years ago. Jessica was smiling, her arms around their two kids. It felt like another lifetime. "What happened to us?" he whispered. The pain was still there, but now it was tempered by something stronger. Determination. Jessica and Derek had torn his world apart, but Benjamin wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. He opened his laptop again, pulling up the spreadsheet. Line by line, he refined his plan. Every move had to be calculated, every step precise. He didn't just want to survive this betrayal. He wanted to come out stronger. As the hours ticked by, the pieces began to fall into place. Jessica and Derek thought they'd won. They were wrong. Benjamin sat in his car outside the courthouse, staring at his phone. The private investigator, Alex Kane, had just sent over the final report. It was a treasure trove of information, dates, locations, emails, and financial statements. Every sordid detail of Jessica and Derek's betrayal was laid bare. The most revealing part, however, was Derek's precarious financial situation. His construction business, which he'd often bragged about during poker nights, was on the brink of collapse. Jessica's sudden withdrawal of funds from the joint account wasn't just for her honeymoon dreams. It was bailing out Derek's failing enterprise. Benjamin let out a low whistle. "So, this is your future, Jessica," he muttered, scrolling through the report. "Let's see how well it holds up under pressure." That night, Benjamin drafted his first move. He created an anonymous email account and began gathering information about Derek's creditors from the investigator's report. Late into the evening, he composed a series of emails, each one tailored to the recipient. Subject: urgent financial irregularities in Derek Holden's business. The emails detailed questionable transactions, unfulfilled contracts, and mounting debts, all backed up by the evidence Alex had gathered. Benjamin attached scanned copies of invoices and receipts that showed discrepancies. Once satisfied, he leaned back in his chair, reviewing the plan. "You built your empire on lies, Derek," Benjamin said under his breath. "Let's see how long it lasts." He clicked send. 2 days later, Benjamin received his first confirmation. An article in the local business journal reported that Derek's assets had been frozen due to an investigation launched by his creditors. A small, grim smile tugged at Benjamin's lips. He knew this was just the beginning. He texted Alex. "Benjamin, Phase 1 complete. Keep digging on Derek and Jessica." Alex, "Got it. You'll have more by next week." Benjamin's next step was to use Jessica's infidelity against her in the divorce proceedings. He had already spoken to Jonathan Brooks, his lawyer, who had assured him that the evidence Alex had collected would be pivotal. At the first court hearing, Jessica entered the room with an air of confidence, her high heels clicking against the polished floor. Derek wasn't with her, and Benjamin could only guess why. Perhaps he was too busy trying to save his crumbling business. "Benjamin," Jessica said as she passed him, her tone dripping with condescension. "Let's make this quick. I have plans later." Benjamin didn't respond, merely nodding to Jonathan, who sat beside him. When the judge entered and the session began, Jonathan wasted no time presenting the evidence. Emails and text messages between Jessica and Derek were projected on a screen, along with financial statements showing the transfers Jessica had made. Jessica's smug expression faltered as the judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Williams, can you explain these transactions?" the judge asked, his tone stern. Jessica stammered, glancing nervously at her lawyer. Those were personal expenses. And this correspondence," Jonathan said, scrolling to an incriminating text exchange. "Can't wait to start our new life. Benjamin will never see it coming. Do you deny sending this?" Jessica's face turned crimson. No further questions," Jonathan said smoothly, sitting down. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled that Jessica was entitled to nothing more than what she had already taken. Benjamin would retain full custody of their children and ownership of the family home. Outside the courtroom, Jessica caught up to him, her heels clacking against the tiled hallway. "Benjamin, wait," she called, her voice strained. He stopped, but didn't turn. "What is it, Jessica?" Her voice softened, almost pleading. "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" Benjamin faced her, his expression unreadable. "Talk? After everything you've done? Why should I?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but Benjamin stood firm. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." He walked away, leaving Jessica standing alone. The fallout hit quickly. Derek's creditors began repossessing his assets, cars, equipment, even his office space. Jessica, now left without the financial cushion she'd relied on, began to feel the weight of her decisions. Benjamin heard through mutual acquaintances that the honeymoon had been canceled. Jessica and Derek were now living in a small apartment, a far cry from the luxury she had envisioned. One evening, while Benjamin was helping his younger daughter with her homework, his phone buzzed. It was a call from Jessica. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "What do you want?" Benjamin asked, his tone cold. "Benjamin, she trailed off, her voice shaky. "I made a mistake." Benjamin's grip tightened on the phone. "You think?" "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we just talk? For the kid's sake?" Benjamin took a deep breath, trying to keep his anger in check. "This isn't about the kids, Jessica. This is about you not being able to deal with the mess you created. You wanted a new life. Well, now you've got it." He hung up, his hand trembling slightly. Benjamin's final move was personal. Using Alex's latest findings, he exposed Derek's fraudulent business practices to local media outlets. Within a week, Derek's reputation was in tatters. His former clients filed lawsuits, and his name became synonymous with scandal. Jessica, now isolated and financially ruined, reached out again, this time through an email. Subject: "I'm sorry." Benjamin deleted it without reading. 1 month later, Benjamin sat in his backyard, sipping a cold beer as his kids played on the lawn. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the house. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. Jessica and Derek had thought they could destroy him, but instead, he had emerged stronger. They were left with nothing but the consequences of their actions, while Benjamin was free to rebuild his life on his terms. He raised his bottle in a quiet toast to himself. "To new beginnings," he said softly, watching the horizon. The knock on Benjamin's door came late in the evening, just as he was settling onto the couch with a book. It was a sharp, frantic sound that broke the quiet. He glanced toward the door, setting his book down. When he opened it, there stood Jessica. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, and her once polished appearance was gone. She clutched a small handbag, trembling slightly. "Benjamin," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Jessica." She looked past him into the house, her eyes flicking to the warm glow of the living room light. "Can I come in?" "No," Benjamin said flatly. Her lips quivered, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, Benjamin, you have to help me. They've taken everything." Benjamin stared at her for a moment, his face impassive. "Funny," he said, his voice low. "You didn't need me, remember? You and Derek had it all figured out." Jessica's shoulders sagged as she stepped back, gripping the railing on the porch. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "A huge mistake." "I know. I didn't think." "You didn't think at all," Benjamin interrupted, his tone sharp. "You gambled everything we built for some fantasy, and now that it's gone, you want to come back?" She wiped her eyes, her tears falling freely. "Benjamin, I'm begging you. I don't have anywhere else to go." Benjamin exhaled slowly, studying her. For a moment, he felt a flicker of the woman he'd once loved, the woman he'd spent over 2 decades with. But then he remembered the laughter, the smirks, and the callous way she had dismissed him at that restaurant. "You made your choice," he said coldly. "And I made mine." He began to close the door, but Jessica's hand shot out, holding it open. "Wait," she said, her voice desperate. "At least hear me out." Benjamin hesitated, then opened the door just enough to step outside, shutting it firmly behind him. He didn't want his kids overhearing any of this. "Talk," he said, his arms still crossed. Jessica's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing. "Derek's gone. He left when the lawsuits started piling up. He said he couldn't deal with the stress, and it wasn't what he signed up for." Benjamin let out a short, humorless laugh. "So, your knight in shining armor abandoned you. Shocking. I was wrong about him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I was wrong about everything. I thought," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know what I thought." Benjamin leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "No, you knew exactly what you were doing, Jessica. You just didn't think you'd lose." Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the porch steps, burying her face in her hands. "I lost everything," she said, her voice muffled. The money's gone. The apartment's gone. They repossessed my car. I don't even have enough to buy groceries. Benjamin stood silently, watching her. The part of him that wanted to offer comfort, out of habit more than anything, was overshadowed by the cold reality of her betrayal. You think I'm going to swoop in and fix this for you? He asked finally. After what you did? Jessica looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. I know I don't deserve it, she said, but I'm asking you as the father of my children. Please, I can't do this alone. Benjamin's jaw clenched. You left me to do it alone. Remember? You didn't even ask about the kids when you walked out. Her eyes widened, guilt flashing across her face. I was selfish, she stammered. I wasn't thinking straight. But I'm here now. And what am I supposed to do with that? Benjamin asked, his voice rising. You think you could just waltz back into my life because you've hit rock bottom? You think that erases everything you've done? Jessica flinched at his tone, but didn't respond. Benjamin took a step back, shaking his head. You're on your own, Jessica. Just like you wanted. He turned and walked back to the door. Wait, she called after him, standing abruptly. Benjamin, please. For the kids. Benjamin stopped with his hand on the doorknob. He turned slowly, his expression hard. The kids are fine. They don't need you dragging them into your mess. And neither do I. With that, he opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it firmly behind him. Inside, Benjamin leaned against the door, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Jessica's pleading face lingered in his mind, but he shook it off. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him again. Dad, a voice called from the hallway. Benjamin looked up to see his daughter, Sophie, peeking around the corner. Who was that? Just someone I used to know, Benjamin said, offering her a reassuring smile. Nothing to worry about. She nodded, trusting his words, and went back to her room. Benjamin walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He stared out the window, watching the stars flicker in the night sky. A part of him wondered what would become of Jessica, but he quickly pushed the thought away. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. For the first time in months, Benjamin felt a strange sense of closure. Jessica had come back, but he had stood his ground. He didn't need her anymore, and he wasn't about to let her back into his life. He took a sip of water, set the glass down, and turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow was a new day, and he was ready to face it. Alone, but at peace. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Benjamin stretched in bed, the warmth of contentment settling over him. It had been 3 years since his life had imploded, but those days felt like a distant memory now. The path to rebuilding hadn't been easy, but with time and determination, Benjamin had created something better, something worth living for. Benjamin first met Mila at a charity event hosted by a mutual friend. He had reluctantly agreed to attend, prodded by his coworker, Ben, who insisted it would be good for him to get out more. You can't keep burying yourself in work, man, Ben said, handing Benjamin a beer. Just go. Worst case, you have some free food and wine. Benjamin had rolled his eyes, but eventually relented. He arrived at the event, blending into the crowd as he sipped his drink and wandered through the art displays. That's when he spotted Mila, standing by a painting, her head tilted as she studied the brushstrokes. You seem really into that one, Benjamin said, stepping beside her. She turned, her auburn hair catching the light. It's fascinating, isn't it? The artist captured so much emotion with so little detail. Benjamin glanced at the painting, a simple landscape, and chuckled. I'll take your word for it. I'm more of a paint-by-numbers guy. Mila laughed, a sound that instantly put him at ease. Well, lucky for you, I'm a great art guide. Stick with me, and you might learn something. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the evening, Benjamin found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years. They exchanged numbers, and over the next few months, their connection deepened. Mila was different from Jessica in every way. She was kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, honest. She didn't play games or keep secrets. Early on, she sensed Benjamin's hesitation and gently addressed it. I know you've been hurt, she said one evening as they walked through the park. But I'm not her, Benjamin. You don't have to be afraid with me. Benjamin stopped, looking into her warm brown eyes. I know, he said quietly. It's just hard to let go of everything sometimes. You don't have to let go all at once, Mila replied. Just let me help carry it with you. That moment marked a turning point for Benjamin. He began to trust again, allowing Mila into the parts of himself he'd kept hidden. Together, they built a relationship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Meanwhile, Jessica and Derek's lives had taken a downward spiral. The weight of their choices bore down on them, fracturing whatever spark they once shared. Derek's financial ruin left him bitter and resentful, and their arguments grew increasingly volatile. "You said this would work," Jessica shouted one evening, slamming a cheap glass down on their rickety kitchen table. They were living in a small apartment now, their surroundings a stark contrast to the life of luxury they'd envisioned. "I didn't see you complaining when you were spending the money," Derek shot back, pacing the room. "You knew exactly what you were getting into." Jessica buried her face in her hands, her voice trembling. "I thought we'd have a future. I didn't think it would end like this." Derek sneered. "Maybe you should have stayed with Benjamin. At least he had some stability." Jessica looked up, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare bring him into this. You're the one who promised me everything." Their shouting matches became routine, each one chipping away at the remnants of their relationship. Eventually, Derek left, leaving Jessica alone to face the consequences of their actions. Benjamin heard about Jessica's struggles through mutual acquaintances. She had taken a series of low-paying jobs and was living paycheck to paycheck. Once, he saw her at a grocery store, her cart filled with discounted items. She didn't see him, and he didn't approach her. Seeing her like that stirred something inside him. Not pity, but a strange sense of closure. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. Benjamin and Mila's relationship blossomed over the years. They took trips together, from quiet weekends in the mountains to bustling city getaways. Mila quickly bonded with Benjamin's kids, treating them with the same care and love she showed him. For the first time in a long time, their house felt like a home again. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, Sophie looked at Mila and said, "You make Dad happy." "I can tell." Benjamin glanced at Mila, his heart swelling. "She makes all of us happy," he said, reaching for her hand. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Benjamin and Mila sat on the porch, watching the stars. "I don't think I've thanked you properly," Benjamin said, his voice soft. "For what?" Mila asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "For being you," he said. "For giving me a second chance at happiness." Mila smiled. "You didn't need me to be happy, Benjamin. You just needed to remember how to let yourself feel it." Years later, Benjamin and Mila stood in their backyard, surrounded by friends and family. It was their wedding day, and the air was filled with laughter and the scent of fresh flowers. As Benjamin looked out at the smiling faces, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life had thrown him into darkness, but he had emerged stronger, with a love he never thought he'd find again. As he and Mila exchanged vows, Benjamin caught sight of Jessica, standing in the distance, half hidden behind a tree. She wasn't smiling. Her face was etched with regret, her eyes fixed on the man she had once discarded. Benjamin held Mila's hands tightly, his voice steady as he promised her a lifetime of love and commitment. He didn't look back at Jessica. This moment wasn't about the past. It was about the future he had built, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. When the ceremony ended, Benjamin glanced at Mila, who squeezed his hand. "Ready for forever?" she asked with a playful grin. "More than ever," Benjamin replied, his smile reaching his eyes. For Benjamin, the chapter on betrayal and pain was finally closed. A new story had begun, one of resilience, love, and the life he truly deserved. It was a crisp autumn morning when Benjamin found the letter in his mailbox. He almost missed it amid the usual stack of bills and flyers, but the familiar handwriting on the envelope caught his eye. "Jessica." Benjamin frowned, gripping the letter tightly as he carried the rest of the mail into the house. Setting the other items aside, he stared at the envelope for a long moment, debating whether to even open it. Against his better judgment, curiosity won. Sitting at the kitchen table, he slid a letter opener across the edge and unfolded the paper inside. The first words hit him like a cold wind. Benjamin, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I have to try. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. A part of him wanted to stop reading, but he couldn't help himself. The letter was long, scrawled with uneven handwriting that betrayed her trembling hand. I don't know how to start this, so I'll just say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to us, to our family. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I was so wrong. Benjamin's fingers clenched the edge of the paper as he read on. Derek wasn't the man I thought he was. He left when things got tough, and I was left to deal with the mess we created. I've lost everything, Benjamin. Everything. The life I thought I wanted turned out to be a nightmare. She went on to describe her struggles in vivid detail, moving from one low-paying job to another, living in a rundown apartment, and dealing with the suffocating weight of her regret. I don't expect you to feel sorry for me, and I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I need you to know that you didn't deserve what I did to you. You were a good husband, a good father, and I threw it all away because I was too selfish to see it. Benjamin's breath caught as he read the next part. I still think about the night at the restaurant, how cruel I was to you. I replay that moment over and over, wishing I could take it all back. But life doesn't work that way, does it? She ended the letter simply. I'll carry this regret for the rest of my life. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Benjamin set the letter down, his hands trembling. The silence in the room felt heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. For a moment, he stared at the paper, a war of emotions churning inside him. Anger, sadness, and a flicker of pity fought for dominance. But as he thought about everything he had been through, everything Jessica had put him through, the anger won. He stood abruptly, grabbing the letter and walking to the fireplace in the living room. The flames crackled softly as he knelt, holding the paper over the fire. I'm not the man you can absolve with a letter, he muttered, watching the flames consume the words she had poured her heart into. The paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into ash. Benjamin stood, brushing his hands off as he turned away from the fireplace. He didn't need her apologies. He didn't need her regrets. He had moved on, built a life worth living, and found someone who treated him with the respect and love he deserved. Jessica's words, raw as they were, couldn't change the past. They couldn't undo the pain she had caused or the trust she had shattered. Later that evening, as Benjamin sat with Mila on the couch, sipping a glass of wine, he thought about the letter again. He hadn't told her about it. There was no point. Mila was his present and his future. Jessica was the past, a ghost that no longer had any power over him. Mila nudged him with her elbow. What's on your mind? Benjamin smiled, taking her hand. Nothing that matters anymore. Good, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Because you seem pretty distracted for a guy who has it all. Benjamin chuckled, kissing the top of her head. You're right. I do have it all. But the letter wasn't the last twist. A week later, Benjamin received another surprise, a visit from Jessica herself. It was a chilly afternoon when he saw her standing on the porch, bundled in an old coat, her hair unkempt and her face pale. Benjamin, she said, her voice barely audible. He opened the door just enough to step outside, crossing his arms as he faced her. What are you doing here? I had to see you, she said, her eyes darting nervously. I need to talk to you. Please. You've said everything you needed to say in the letter, Benjamin replied. I don't think there's anything else to discuss. Jessica hesitated, her hands trembling. I know, but I wanted to say it in person. I wanted you to see how sorry I am. Benjamin's expression didn't soften. I saw it in the letter. I don't need to see it again. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't move. Benjamin, I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that losing you is the greatest regret of my life. You lost me the moment you betrayed me, Benjamin said, his voice cold. And I'm not interested in reopening old wounds. Jessica's face crumpled, and she wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. I understand, she whispered. I had to try. Benjamin stepped back toward the door, his hand on the knob. Take care of yourself, Jessica. That's all I can say. Before she could respond, he closed the door. He stood there for a moment, exhaling slowly. The encounter had stirred emotions he thought he had buried, but as the seconds ticked by, he realized something important. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't bitter. Jessica's words, her tears, and her regrets, they no longer had any power over him. Benjamin walked back into the living room, where Mila was reading a book. She looked up and smiled. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," Benjamin said, sitting beside her. "It's perfect." And for the first time in years, he truly believed it. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. Benjamin stood in the backyard of the home he shared with Mila, the soft hum of laughter from their children filling the air. The fire pit crackled in the center of the patio, casting flickering shadows over the group seated around it. Sophie was telling a story to Mila's daughter, Mia, who hung on her every word, while Alex roasted marshmallows with Mila's son, Jack. The blending of their families had been gradual but seamless, and tonight was one of those rare evenings where everything felt perfect. Benjamin leaned against the railing of the deck, sipping his lemonade. Mila joined him, carrying a plate of freshly grilled skewers. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, setting the plate on the small table beside him. "Everything okay?" Benjamin turned to her, a soft smile spreading across his face. "More than okay. Just taking it all in." Mila smiled back, resting her hand on his arm. "It's a beautiful night." "It is," he agreed. He glanced at the kids, their laughter filling the air. Sophie nudged Alex, who accidentally dropped his marshmallow into the fire, groaning in exaggerated despair. Mia giggled, offering him another one from the bag. Mila watched the scene with him, her eyes softening. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly, her tone thoughtful rather than probing. Benjamin considered her question, swirling his drink before answering. "I used to," he admitted. "A lot, actually, but not anymore." She tilted her head, studying his expression. "Not even a little?" He shook his head. "The past was necessary. It taught me what I deserved, what I didn't deserve, and how to rebuild. But I don't carry it with me anymore. That part of my life feels like it belongs to someone else." Mila reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "That's a good answer." Benjamin chuckled. "It's the truth." As the evening wore on, the family gathered closer around the fire. The kids had shifted their focus to making s'mores, a chaotic yet cheerful operation that left melted chocolate and marshmallow on nearly every hand and face. Mila leaned over to Benjamin, whispering, "I think we need to hose them all down before they come back inside." "Agreed," Benjamin said, grinning. "But it's worth the cleanup. They're having a blast." Sophie held up her creation triumphantly. "Perfect s'more," she declared, only to have it collapse in her hand. She groaned, and everyone burst into laughter. Mila shook her head. "She's got your persistence," she teased. Benjamin smirked. "And my lack of coordination, apparently." Jack, who had been quietly working on his own, held up a meticulously crafted s'more. "This is how it's done," he announced, earning playful boos from Sophie and Alex. "Show off," Alex muttered, though he was laughing. Later, after the kids had gone inside to clean up, Benjamin and Mila stayed behind to extinguish the fire. The embers glowed faintly as Benjamin used a stick to spread them out, ensuring everything was safe. The cool evening breeze ruffled his hair, and for a moment he simply stood there, taking in the silence. Mila came up beside him, sliding her arms around his waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" He rested his hand over hers, his gaze on the glowing embers. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. This," he gestured toward the house and yard, "this life we've built, it's everything I didn't know I needed." Mila pressed her cheek against his back. "You deserve it, Benjamin. You deserve every bit of happiness." He turned to face her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "So do you, Mila? And I'm grateful every day that we found each other." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Me too." As they walked back toward the house, Benjamin's thoughts briefly drifted to Jessica and Derek. He didn't think of them often anymore, but when he did, it was with a sense of detachment rather than anger. He knew they had continued to struggle. Jessica had reached out once more, through a mutual acquaintance, but Benjamin had politely declined any contact. Closure doesn't come from revisiting old wounds, he had told Mila at the time. It comes from knowing you've moved on. And he had. Jessica and Derek were a painful chapter, but they were also a necessary one. Without them, he might never have discovered his own resilience or realized the kind of life he was capable of building. Inside, the kids were sprawled out in the living room, flipping through movie options for the night. The air was filled with a mix of playful arguments and laughter as they debated over what to watch. Not that one, Alex groaned. We've seen it a million times, but it's a classic, Sophie argued, crossing her arms. Jack raised an eyebrow. Define classic. Mia rolled her eyes. Can we just pick something already? Benjamin and Mila exchanged amused glances. We should probably intervene before this turns into a full-blown war, Mila said, laughing. Benjamin grinned. Let's give them a few more minutes. They're bonding. Mila shook her head but didn't argue. Instead, she leaned into Benjamin's side as they stood in the doorway, watching their kids. The sight filled him with a deep, quiet joy, one that made him certain he was exactly where he was meant to be. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Benjamin and Mila sat on the porch with cups of tea. The stars were bright against the dark sky, and the air carried the faint scent of the extinguished fire pit. Mila turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had gone differently? If Jessica hadn't, Benjamin shook his head before she could finish. No point wondering, he said. It didn't happen that way. And honestly, I'm glad it didn't. Mila raised an eyebrow. Glad? Benjamin nodded. If it had, I wouldn't be here with you. I wouldn't have this life, these moments. I wouldn't trade them for anything. Her smile was soft, her eyes glistening. You always know the right thing to say. He took her hand, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. It's not about saying the right thing. It's about meaning it. They sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of their connection enveloping them. The past no longer cast its shadow over Benjamin's heart. He had found peace, love, and a new beginning, a happily ever after he had never thought possible. As the night deepened, Benjamin looked up at the stars and thought, this is it. This is where I'm meant to be.